Today, we're going to talk about a name you might not know, but you absolutely should. Robert C. Weaver. He was a quiet trailblazer, a foundational architect of modern American urban policy. And his story? Well, it's a masterclass in how expertise and sheer persistence can reshape a nation from the inside out. Let's just get this out of the way right up front, because it's a huge deal. In 1966, Robert Weaver became the first African American to ever serve in a U.S. presidential cabinet. He broke one of the highest barriers in the federal government. But that single moment wasn't the beginning of his story. It was the culmination of a lifetime of work. And when I say it was a long journey, I mean it. His path spanned decades. It started way back in 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, continued through that landmark appointment in '66, and left a legacy that is still very much alive today. We're talking about over 30 years of dedicated, transformative public service. So, how does someone even start on a path like that? Where does that journey begin? Well, for Weaver, it all began with a foundation of, and I mean this, truly remarkable excellence, which was built from his earliest days. Okay, so picture this. Weaver is born in Washington, D.C., and he's not just born into any family. This is a family where education and achievement were just the standard. His grandfather, Dr. Robert Tanner Freeman, was a trailblazer himself, the very first Black graduate of Harvard's dental school. So yeah, the bar was set pretty high from the get-go. With that kind of legacy and an education at the legendary Dunbar High School, the path forward for him was clear. And you know what? Weaver didn't just meet those high expectations, he completely shattered them. He followed his grandfather to Harvard and walked away with not one, not two, but 3 degrees, capping it all off with a Ph.D. in economics. Now, this wasn't just about collecting diplomas. This was about building an arsenal of knowledge. He was getting ready to fight for equality, but he was going to do it with cold, hard, indisputable economic data. So, armed with this incredible education, Weaver steps out of the university and right into the fire, one of the most chaotic and transformative times in all of American history. It's 1933. The country is in the grips of the Great Depression, and Robert Weaver, who's only 27 years old, by the way, starts his work in the federal government. He joins the Roosevelt administration, bringing that sharp economic mind right to the very heart of the New Deal. And look, he wasn't just some guy filing papers. The sheer scope of his influence back then is just staggering. He became a key member of Roosevelt's informal Black cabinet, and from that position, he was in the trenches, fighting to make sure Black communities weren't left out of New Deal programs. He was the one pushing for fair employment clauses in federal contracts. Then, during World War II, he was essential in mobilizing Black labor for the war effort. He was building a more equitable America, one policy at a time. So you'd think after all that, maybe he'd take a break, right? Nope, not Robert Weaver. He just shifts gears and enters this whole new phase of his career, cementing his reputation as, and this is no exaggeration, the nation's #1 expert on housing and urban life. I mean, he literally wrote the book on housing segregation, several of them actually. His work, The Negro Ghetto, was a complete game changer. He took this racist lie that Black families moving into a neighborhood lowered property values, and he just dismantled it with data, piece by piece. He was essentially handing the civil rights movement the factual ammunition it needed to win its arguments. And this is what was so brilliant about him. He wasn't just an academic locked away in an ivory tower. He was on the ground, putting his theories into practice. He took on huge leadership roles in Chicago and then in New York, where he served as the state's rent commissioner. He was testing his ideas in the real world. So, with this mountain of experience, as a scholar, an administrator, a policy expert, you just knew Washington was going to come calling again. It was inevitable. But getting a real seat at the table, well, that was going to be a fight. And sure enough, in 1961, President John F. Kennedy taps him on the shoulder. He wants Weaver to come back to D.C. to lead the Housing and Home Finance Agency, which was the precursor to HUD. This put Weaver in charge of all federal housing programs. And just like that, he was the highest-ranking Black official in the government at that time. But Kennedy had an even bigger vision. He didn't just want Weaver running an agency. He wanted to create a whole new cabinet-level department with Weaver at the helm. The problem? Congress, especially Southern segregationists, blocked it. It took another 4 years and the formidable political muscle of President Lyndon Johnson to finally push the bill through and create the Department of Housing and Urban Development in 1965. And then, in January 1966, the moment arrived. Robert C. Weaver was confirmed as the first Secretary of HUD, becoming the very first African-American cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. Think about that. A barrier that had stood for 177 years finally came crashing down. And here's what's so important to understand. This was not some symbolic gesture. This was not a token appointment. President Johnson himself said that after looking at over 300 candidates, he came to the conclusion that Weaver was simply, quote, the man for the job. His selection was a testament to a lifetime of preparation and unmatched expertise. So, the architect finally gets to design the building. What happens next? Well, his legacy would become a blueprint for change that we are still using to this day. As secretary, he was a key force behind the landmark Fair Housing Act of 1968. And even after he left government, he didn't stop. He became a college president, then a distinguished professor, always passing his incredible knowledge on to the next generation. He just never stopped building. So when you boil it all down, what's his legacy? It's really two powerful things, side by side. He was the policy architect whose fingerprints are all over our modern federal housing system. And at the same time, he was the quiet, determined trailblazer who proved that excellence could overcome prejudice at the very highest levels of power. And in the year 2000, that legacy was literally cemented in stone. The headquarters of HUD, the very department he helped create, was renamed the Robert C. Weaver Federal Building. It's the first cabinet building in Washington, D.C. ever named in honor of an African American, a fitting tribute to the man who built so much. And that really leaves you with a powerful thought, doesn't it? The story of Robert Weaver shows us how a single, dedicated life can lay the foundation for a more just society. His work reminds us that the blueprints for a better future are often drawn not with loud proclamations, but with quiet competence and an unwavering commitment to the work.